you can have after your name when you get really old. So you hang around long enough, and good things happen, actually. Thanks to Dr. Wu for the presentation prior to this one. Covered a lot of ground. Some of the things I'll talk about will be also within those areas, specifically the specific aims and section and the Biosketch section. I thought I would give a little bit of a different twist to this afternoon. You've heard a lot about the mechanics and rationale behind the review process, the separate sections, and a grant proposal specifically to the NIH. So I will kind of tell you a little bit more or bring out some more issues related to what I think comes before that. And it's embraced in the title, the development of a research theme and securing funding. I think you cannot have one without the other. Preferably you start with your research theme first, and you use elements within that theme to apply for funding from different organizations. So that's kind of where I'm starting. So to me, a research theme is critical to securing funding, and that's where I'm going to start. I have two places, actually one place in the middle of this where I think we'll talk a little bit about the questions or I will respond to the questions you might have up to that point. I'm using this time and I view it more as a discussion than just a presentation. We could sit and continue to give you information that has previously been prepared and presented. I don't know if that'll be useful. I'd rather have a lot of discussion about different issues related to each of individual. All of this is so individualized anyhow. You have certain templates to follow. How you follow them depends upon what you do, and what you do depends upon how you think, and how you think depends on how you've been trained. And you just keep going back further and further into your education and into your development as a professional in science. So I'm going to start with the idea of a research theme. And I think some of the critical things to keep in mind, and this is maybe a little more critical for junior faculty, but not much. I think it's critical to everybody. You always have to answer the question, you apply for funding for these reasons here. You apply for funding to support your central theme of research, basic science, translational, support graduate students, postdocs, training grants, teaching kinds of issues. In the NIH, which we are talking most about today, but we all know there's DoD funding. I know someone in the audience has Air Force funding. You also have K training kind of grants, T and K series. We've been talking so far about the R series at the NIH. Maybe at another session we can talk more about these other forms of funding, other institutions where you can get funding. But when I talk about a theme of research, I think it's something that is personal. It's something you develop over a period of time, sometimes a very long period of time, but you have to keep that in mind as to what you're doing in the grand scheme of things. And we'll go into that as I go through this talk. You can apply to support the development of your lab. We all need instrumentation, and of course we need space to put the instruments. So there's always the challenges at the university. What's the phrase? The final frontier is space. Space in the building next door, space in the building down the road, but space someplace. And you're always thinking about where you can get some instrumentation. A story that applies to me personally, when I was in Atlanta, I was on a 3/8 appointment kind of at the VA in Atlanta. I was chair of a school at Georgia Tech and the director of a lab at Georgia Tech, but I also had an affiliation with the VA. At the end of the year, at that time, I don't know if it's still true, someone can comment on it, but the VA always has a lot of money and a lot of stuff to buy, and they don't necessarily know where to buy it or what to buy for some of the people within the particular location. I'm walking through this facility, and I see an MTS system kind of in the corner For those of you that don't know what an MTS system is, it's a materials testing machine. There's a couple of kinds. It's basically a very controlled environment to test materials, biological materials, physical materials. And I'm saying, so whose is that? Because I had just started an O&P program, and I needed to test materials for one of my faculty who was using these leaf spring at the time kinds of prostheses, lower extremity BK prosthetic devices. They said, nobody. I said, can I borrow that? They said, yes. So I got it delivered to my lab, and I signed something every May or June that it was on lease for another year, and on lease for another year. My point is, keep your eyes open for stuff, and I mean stuff that's very useful to your particular research. It's very difficult to get a large instrumentation grant. You usually have to collaborate with somebody else to get that. And if it's in your interests to do that, along with another group to do that, like an fMRI, then you go ahead and push for that. But that's difficult. So keep your eyes open, and good things can happen. In this case, they did. I had to buy different load cells and a whole bunch of other stuff. It was a lot cheaper than buying the original system. So to develop a lab or instrumentation, you must compare the goals of funding source and your your central theme, short-term and long-term goals. So that's why you apply for money. Keep yourself going, right? You do not apply for funding, especially these days, and I think this was addressed a little bit in the first talk, for the sake of submitting an application. It's like these calls we get from the mortgage insurance people. And all they do is get you online, and sometimes they don't even say anything. As soon as you say hello, they go click, which means they've completed the call and they get their dollar for completing the call, or whatever the remuneration there is. It has nothing to do with you, and it has nothing to do with them. It just has everything to do with the communication. Well, that's probably not a good idea to be doing these days, because money, as been mentioned, is really tight. So you have to have your best first time copy submitted the first time. My suggestion to you is, or don't do that. Okay? It's very time consuming for you. It's very time consuming to the university who has to put it through their research office. It's time consuming to the reviewers, and you don't want to get them on the wrong side of you and your work, because they'll see you again. So your first copy has to be your best copy. Otherwise, do not apply. Because you receive some kind of a FRA or RFA or RFP unrelated to your work, maintain your focus. You have a general idea of what you'd like to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about mine just as an example. But you have to have a general idea of what you want to do. And if you have that, you begin to see. I really liked Dr. Wu's slide with the puzzle. That's a very good slide. I've almost been looking for a slide like that for a long time, because I look at a career as a puzzle that you're putting pieces together to have a picture. Now, if the picture's got 4 buildings in it, and you want one of those buildings to get funded, using an analogy here, in that building you're doing osteoporosis, and you have another building where you're doing something else, you could take each one of those parts of that puzzle that has a picture of itself and go find an agency to support that. You put the whole picture together, and that's what you do. It's got nothing to do with really anything made up. It's all you. So maintain your focus. Anything unrelated, unless nothing. It has to be related. We always go after money, and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to get this money. No, you're not going to get that money. If they put it out like that, usually somebody else has already got it, and they're just putting something out. Or you're on the bottom of the list, and you don't need to be on the bottom of the list. Just to be part of a large collaborative group. I'm going to introduce this topic in terms of developing your own theme that has to do with collaboration. Because you have to think about the challenges and the benefits of collaborating. Bring ideas to the table. Bring your own ideas to the table and get something in return. I used to say, you bring something to the table. It's not just bringing something to the table, it's bringing an idea to the table. In other words, if you have a methodology that you've perfected, and someone a couple of doors down has a project and needs that methodology, you really have to think about whether that's in your benefit just to help that person out. What do you get out of that? If you get out of an improvement, an extension of your domain through a collaboration with that person, and you can improve that methodology to use the way you want to use it, or to validate it for an application where you've shown its benefit in a number of different areas, fine. But if it's just to help that person and you can't see any benefit to it, I'd have to say think twice about that. So collaborative groups bring ideas to the table, not just things to the table, and get something in return. You have to get something out of that. Your time is very valuable. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my ideas of what I do. Our previous speaker, Dr. Wu, is a statistician, extremely valuable people. Need them every day of your life in research. You need to engage a team who knows what they're doing about data analysis and experimental design. That's a must. My world is in neural control and the development of control strategies used in meeting selected task demands. It's pretty broad. It's okay. Some people have an interest in cancer. Some people have an answer in stroke, an interest in stroke. Very broad topics, but that's okay. You begin to narrow it down a little bit. I started in skeletal muscle, and I still am in skeletal muscle, another broad topic. But skeletal muscle we call a mutable actuator. And I have a question: how are muscles used by the nervous system to control movement? How are they used? What's the strategy? Okay, we all are in movement science to some degree. We all are in quantification of movement. We are all in applying those skills to study questions in physiological systems, to study questions related to disease. But this is kind of where I sit. That's my major question. How do they use the muscles, which are mutable actuators? They change with age, they change with disease, they change their force output depending upon whether they're longer or shorter. Fiber types, there's a huge body of knowledge in that area. I also am interested in characterizing plasticity of muscle and neural circuits. There's an interdependence between these two, of course, the muscle and the nerve, and I basically call it a control of changing resources, which is kind of where this mutable actuator comes in. Your resources to the nervous system change all the time. They change. They change with age. They change with training. They change with disease, where they might become dystrophic, or they might become, in terms of muscle size, they become smaller. Plus integrity goes down. So we are constantly trying to characterize the effect of these changing resources, which are interdependent, on how the nervous system uses these resources to control movement. So I link to a lot of different things. Of course, the translational research designed to understand challenges in selected clinical populations. I don't have an expertise in Parkinson's disease, but I know a lot about it through collaborations I've had with scientists at Georgia Tech and at Emory University. I don't know a lot about stroke, but I've worked with people that have used devices that I've used to quantify the effects of different interventions on stroke. Carolee Winstein at USC is one of those people. So you had her here a couple of months ago to talk about that. So as a colleague of hers, I've learned a lot from her, and she's learned a lot from me in terms of how to deal with quantification of these changes in this system, and how an intervention to kind of bring someone back close to normal is the objective of that intervention. I use two tasks. I kind of have a theme in my own research that I don't really care how well you can ride a bike or how well you can walk necessarily. I use that task to test the neuromuscular system and its response to these changes. And I've used them in many, many different ways. And the reason I use these two has changed also. This is how you develop a theme. You have a More controlled environment on a bicycle. That's an old picture, but as I said, I'm old. And I study energetics and synergies and translational research. We've used this particular kind of environment, not exactly that environment. We've gotten a little better bikes and load systems and stuff. But I use it to test amputees. I use it to test stroke patients. We've used it in direct stimulation of muscle and paraparetics and exercise. So we've used this particular task to study different things where the resources have changed. We're trying to make them better. So you need some intervention to do that, and that's what we deal with, these changing resources and how the nervous system deals with those. I use slope walking, and I used it originally at Ball State because I was interested in caloric expenditure. Run up a hill, run down a hill. I used to do a lot of running, marathon running, and I know it's harder to run up a hill than down a hill. So, except downhill isolates on the quads, but still the energetics of going uphill is a bit more difficult than going down. Today, I use it to study in slope walking peripheral nerve injury. Same kind of paradigm, but it's a different question, but it's still central to the theme of what I'm interested in, is my point. You can see this, if I can get this to work, here. These are patterns of muscles that are used in the lower extremity, and they are pretty robust. I think I've used that word in the title, so they're pretty robust, and they don't change much. In the cycling task, remember, because it's controlled. They change in slope walking, though. Had an experience, talked with people at Ball State recently that were interested in a big NIH project, and they wanted to have a task at the beginning and a task at the end, and they wanted to do slope walking. And the reason they wanted to use upslope walking was they wanted to see if they've improved anybody's cardiovascular system with this particular intervention. And they were testing particular muscles. And the question was, do the muscles act the same in those two tasks? If I'm going to use a muscle A in downslope and another muscle A in upslope, that muscle's going to have a different experience in those two tasks. So you almost can't do that. In terms of the rationale why you're using a particular movement paradigm, you need to be very aware of how the system might change as a result of the change in the paradigm. Because remember at the beginning I said task demands. The demands of the task are different. So, enough about an example. The question here is, where do you go? Where do you go from here? Where do you start in this theme, building this theme? What is your path, your theme of research? And I always liked this sign. My sister gave it to me. I used to think it was you didn't know what you were doing. You know, which way to go. You hit the T in the road, am I going right or am I going left? And you don't have a GPS system, which everybody has today. It's a famous one by Robert Frost. And what I like about it is the path that you chose was less traveled by. So my take from that is think outside the box. Look for things like finding that MTS system. We used to have an engineer at UCLA who used to walk around campus and I wouldn't call him a dumpster diver, but he was looking for stuff in the dumpsters. He'd find generators and he'd build you something you need for your lab. Cost, zero. Very valuable, very valuable. So my point is here, think a little outside the box. With your collaborations, with your own work, with the methods that you use, don't be afraid to try something. As long as it's going to benefit you, try it. That's why I like that sign, because it will make all the difference. In development of a theme, you will be asked. And who is going to ask you these questions? The reviewers you talked about this morning are going to ask you those questions. Your chair is going to ask you those questions for promotion and tenure. The funding agency is going to ask you those questions for sure, whether it's the Department of Defense or whether it's the VA or whether it's NIH or whether it's NSF. They're going to ask you these questions. Describe your career goals and your specific research questions. A grant application is a subset of your general theme of research. Why did you put it together that way? Because it was interesting. It was something that was really caught your attention. And it's not always sometimes because the data show differences in something. I think equally important is they don't show any difference in something. You've done an intervention and you see no effect. Sometimes that's just as good as seeing an effect. We're so interested, oh, put that over here, we didn't see anything. And about 4 years later you go back, why didn't we see anything over there? So this is with respect to career goals and specific research questions. That's what I was getting at with the specific aims, which I'm going to move to at the end. I like this idea of maintaining an updated version of your central interests and research goals, and I don't think it's just applicable to junior faculty. I do it. I always have to do it. I have to keep myself, where am I? Where is this project? Where is this paper going? I get off on too many things and I have to make sure I'm focused. It's critical. We used to have people, I used to work individually with faculty at Tech because we were a small school. I'd go in their office and sit down and talk to the faculty and say, so where is this going right now? How does this affect you? Why are you teaching over here when you don't have to teach in another unit on campus and you're not taking care of something you need to do here? So it's an ongoing discussion, but at USC, we used to make people write a 5-year plan down. And it was in their merit reviews. 5-year plan. Are you following it? How far have you followed this? Where is it going? Or have you changed something in that plan? Because careers certainly go like this, and your theme can go like this. You get known for something general, but you have to be able to have some variability in that. And I think this 5-year plan allows that, and it also keeps you focused, if you can think that way. You will also be asked to set your goals. You know, how many publications do you want this year? How many grants are you going to try to get this year? What are you going to do personally? These are, you will be asked these, but you're actually asking them of yourself also. Collaborate but listen. It gets back to this thing about collaborators. What are they after? What are you after? Question and network. Very important. About your approach, specific aims, research design, funding sources, and everything else. This all goes with stuff that kind of was discussed in the first talk this morning, this afternoon. You should ask, for example, should I collaborate? Should I engage in interdisciplinary work? How much? What's the balance? You ask this question. These are asked of you. You ask one, this is an example. You ask that question. So how do I get my theme going? How much collaboration do I have? How much interdisciplinary work do I have? Remember I said before a couple slides ago, think about the challenges and benefits of collaboration. Well, first of all, collaborative efforts are fundable. They are fundable. You need to do interdisciplinary work. If you don't, you're countercurrent, so to speak, right now to the flow of what's going on in the world. We're very much integrated. We're dealing with an integrated system, so you need an integrated approach to the study of that system. Interdisciplinary research requires you to think outside the box. I've mentioned that already, and don't be afraid to ask questions. What is important in a collaboration? It can extend the domain of work. I said that already. To clarify that, if you have a project, for example, you need someone's lab to do something in as part of your project, as part of your idea. And they do work that you can't do, but you can do it in that lab. That's what I'm thinking about here. Extend the domain of your work. You may have certain ideas about your studies, and you can apply it to a particular population if you work with somebody, as I mentioned before, the Parkinson's disease example. It allows you to engage in selected projects. Again, focus and theme. It allows you to study the integration of physiological systems, cells to behavior. We have a group in a program project that Janet mentioned, and it actually does go from cells to behavior. I have an animal model. There's a man who's got unbelievable skills in molecular and cell biology. He's in the School of Cell Biology at Emory University. He does all of that stuff for us. This is peripheral nerve injury, self-reinnervated muscle. I have a guy that does terminal experiments for us that can test all the reflexes we want, can really look at nervous system. I can't do any of that stuff, but they can't do what I do. That's what makes it interdependent. each are independent, but we're interdependent in order to achieve the total goal of that particular grant. That's why we've had it for so long, because it's a collaborative effort. And they almost, well, the last time they asked us to reapply for it. And they said, you guys stay together and do this again, because it was going in a good direction. Doesn't happen too often, so needless to say, we took them up on it. This is a balance for everybody, independence and interdependence, and it's a key question to people who are junior faculty. So I want to take some questions. I don't want to be doing, as I said, all of the talking here. I'd like to get some comments from you all about, and I know you just had something to eat, so. Between development of a research theme and research funding, any example that you personally have? How do you begin to focus on your research theme? You might have a question about that. I don't want to wait till the end right now. We just talked a little bit about this, maybe 20 minutes worth, or maybe a half hour worth, and collaboration and interdisciplinary research. What do you all feel about collaboration? Somebody. This is a class where you have to communicate. It reminds, at least we're all sitting up front here, right? Students usually sit in the back. Yes?
I just have kind of a comment. I think the collaborative, that's definitely the way to go. I think there is just a challenge because of how much we have available to collaborate around UNLV so far.
Yes.
I've tried to contact, I forgot which group it was that helped us match with faculty with our similar research interests and methodologies and so forth. And even they were having a hard time helping me with the match. So I think it's not that we as a researcher doesn't want to do that. It's just that I think there's just a few challenges that we have here regarding that.
Yeah. I am becoming more and more aware of that. You have cities like Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, you have New York, Philadelphia, places in Delaware, places in Seattle, San Francisco, you can name a million of them, where there's much more of a community that embraces, that you can embrace. That's a challenge here. I don't have a solution to that, of course. If anybody has a comment to address that relates to that here, someone's done something relatively unique that gets you outside. I know one of the things, I'm sure you've all done this, but one of the things you do, as you suggested even, you look around campus for what you have, you look to the community for what you have, and then what do? If there's nobody here doing your work, you have to seek collaborations maybe with other universities somewhere. I know I was on a review panel for UMass and their Department of Kinesiology, and even up there they had to go to other universities to get some things that they needed. There was a young lady interested in ACL knee kinds of issues, and she had a force plate, but it was, hour and a half drive. So I guess you do what you have to do, and you have to manage it the way you do, and leave just to be as creative as you can. I can't say much more than that.
Yeah. Well, I do look for other universities that collaborations part. I think it's just a lot of funding, or they look into at least within your community, or that you can even go find them within 30 minutes or an hour.
Yeah.
Versus collaboration with multiple universities, which usually is not too bad, not
Yeah.
as difficult. Versus if we don't have it within our community or university, it may get very challenging as junior faculty.
Yes.
But those that are been doing it for a long time, not so much of an issue. The junior faculty need that face-to-face sometimes.
They do.
That mentorship sometimes.
They do.
Collaboration that I think would be way more beneficial.
They do. I mean, maybe you could interact with people, Skype someone, you have somebody somewhere that you can bounce a lot of stuff off. It's a former advisor, or your PhD advisor, or if it involves a postdoc, you might be able to talk to that. Or just a colleague that you went through some things together and do that. It's not obviously the satisfying answer, but it's a little bit on the way maybe to try to keep going with that kind of stuff. Any other comments as far as that, collaborations, or I think maybe you pretty much know about a theme. I'm asking you, I guess, and proposing that you continue to think about that line of research. It's easy sometimes, someone's got some money over here and you're going over there. My experience with that kind of stuff is you don't get the money anyhow, or somebody else gets it and you're just kind of in the crowd. So it's very difficult, yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk about Biosketch. You did talk about it in the first hour a little bit. I'm going to give you the rationale why I'm focusing on Biosketch is because we've already talked about your central theme and your theme of research, and this is where you get to tell the reviewers all about that. It is new. I think that's been discussed. The new format for applications, I think 2015 is when they started that. 5 pages required for all senior key persons in the application. And it has a certain number of sections in there. I think one of the most important sections in there is the personal statement. I think that was stated this morning. This is where you can tell all about yourself. You have to remember the personal statement in a grant application is specific to that grant application. It's not just your standard statement about what you do with your life. You have to show the relevance of what you're doing to the grant that you're asking for, to the project that you've outlined, to the aims that you have described within that, and the rationale for those experiments that you have. You have to make sure that that gets into the personal statement. These grants today, applications, do not have a lot of room. You have to be very efficient with use of figures, where you can say things, and this is one of the places where you can tell them more about yourself. Okay? Positions and honors, contributions to science, I'm going to have in the next 2 slides. But just to emphasize again, the personal statement is critical here. It's like the introduction on your aims page. That's what they're going to look at, is that personal statement. Specific to the application, showcase your knowledge skills, why you are uniquely suited to do this work, and the opportunity to explain circumstances if limited productivity. This all happens here in the personal statement. A thing that I also like to emphasize is that you often talked about significance this morning, and I think one of the things you need to make sure is in this, I'm sure one of the things you need to make sure is in this personal statement, is why you're doing this project. It's not just the significance of the project. It's why you're in a good place right now to do that project. Why are you the batting fourth in the rotation? Why are you up at the plate? Where did you come from that brought you here in your thinking and in your logic and in your scientific work? It brought you to this point. They better know that you're there and you can do this and you're the best person to do this. We'll talk a little bit, or it's been discussed also within the main body of the grant in the section on significance, but I think it's important for you to remember that. It's not just the significance of the project, it's the significance of you writing this grant and where you are in your career to do this project. Why are you doing it and nobody else? So why are you uniquely suited to do this work? Showcase your knowledge skills, and it has to be, again, specific to that application. Contributions to science have been discussed. Again, this is your central research theme, right? I mean, you have, as a junior faculty, you may have 2 of these areas that you feel are contributions to science. But I've noted some things here that allow you to be a little creative in how you deal with that. Maybe have few publications, but can summarize each publication. You can tell a review a little bit more about that publication. There's a paragraph and then the citations. You can tell them a little bit more in that paragraph about what those particular publications were about. A more senior investigator relies on a general kind of a paragraph and then cites the specific references. Okay. Same pub can be referenced in more than one heading. I think there was a question about that today. And my view of that is a publication can address obviously more than one contribution to science that you've made. And if it does, do it. Put it in there. Especially if you don't have a lot of publications, but one of them covers two main areas that you're citing as a contribution, then you do that. Don't be shy about that. Citations do not need to be your own publications. That's another thing. Sometimes you'll find a publication that used your work. They used your results. You stimulated the conduction of that particular manuscript. You may have even contributed to that manuscript, but as an author down the line. But even if you didn't, and you can describe the utility of that paper and how it rested on your work in that paragraph, I'd put it in there. Okay, so there's just some items on the Biosketch here. And lastly, I think this is the last one, yeah. The link to your full list of published work, non-peer-reviewed, peer-reviewed, non-peer-reviewed, accepted for publication kinds of things. Don't list something that's in preparation and review. You don't do that. Everybody's got something in preparation, right? You always got something in preparation. I don't care if it's one thing or 20 things. I don't know which is better if you only have one versus 20, but they're still in preparation. So our life is in preparation sometimes. Science experts, I think you know this, the curriculum vitae tool to transform Biosketch to new formats and stuff. You can look that stuff up on the web. Biosketch is important. It's not trivial. It's an extremely important part of the grant that was stated earlier, and we're just restating that. This has been kind of stated as well, reinforce it, envision an exciting project. The rationale for the project is the key. It's something you tell a reviewer about immediately, and the specific aims. You should relate it to your general research theme, the project. They know the big picture. If it's a significant problem, where do you sit within the domain of trying to solve that? What part of that are you going to solve? How the project fits with your future goals. You have to think about that when you're designing a particular series of experiments to answer a series of aims. The novelty, your unique niche in this. Appropriate funding mechanisms and focus. Do not be overly ambitious. Where I have this on here, I forget, but I'll tell you about it now and I'll mention it again later. I am on faculty at this Tiger workshop. Used to be the ARIS workshop. And the workshop started in 2002, I think. And the design of the workshop, it's held every year. You can apply for it. The design of the workshop is to have a week, an intense week, where you come with an idea, and hopefully you walk out with a better idea and a better description of that idea. So who is at this project? Who is at this workshop? It's funded by the NIH. It's funded by, I think originally NCMRR, the committee within NICHD rather, Child Health. And they funded this Tiger workshop. Used to be ARIS. I won't go into the acronyms, but Tiger is training in grant writing, rehabilitation research. So it's mostly rehabilitation research, which is kind of the world we're in anyhow, most of us. So the week is a very interesting week. I'll tell you some of the things that we do during that week. We meet in groups, so maybe 80 people apply and about 35 are accepted. Costs them money to do that. You meet in groups, continuous through the week. First night you're there as a mentee, you and your colleagues, which are the other mentees in that particular group, get up and give the elevator talk on your project. Elevator talk, right? 5-minute talk. What are you doing? Before you get to the first floor if you're going down, or the 21st floor if you're going up. You have longer maybe going up than going down, but it depends on if it's the local or the express. But you got to give your talk in about 5 minutes. And the design of that is to have a group effort in improving everybody. So there's 3 mentors and probably 9 mentees in each group. 6 to 9 in each group. And by the end of the week, the mentors are kind of sitting there just listening to the mentees. They're just sitting to the people who paid to come there and helping themselves. They will critique them, one another. We critique what they've written also, but they will wind up critiquing each other. There's also a section there where we have somebody with some pretty thick skin to put their aims up on a screen. I'm going to do that at the end of this talk. And everybody in the room has at it. These are your aims, where you are in your general theme of research or where you are with a particular grant, and you get it from everybody in the room. And some of the people in the room are pretty experienced at the kind of things that you're doing. And I'm telling you, it's an eye-opener. If Ping were here, he'd double that, triple that. He'd reinforce that for sure. It's a great experience. And the people come away from it knowing how to write a grant. Who is at the workshop? Besides faculty like myself, there are program officers there from maybe 6 or 7 institutes. There's the VA, NSF, DOD, a number of foundations, Cerebral Palsy Foundation. So there's a great, and there's 4 biostatisticians there all week. Unbelievable. They really get an intense workout on their efforts. And it helps them with all of these things about getting started with a particular project. Some of them may already have a grant, but it gets them started on another application. And we force them to talk about their goals. We force them to talk about what's novel about this. We ask them questions like I did on the first time, what you will be asked. We ask those questions of those mentees. So it's a very rich week, and I think that kind of principle can be applied almost anywhere. It could be applied here. You could get together as often as you wanted to get together, informally or formally, to talk about stuff. Maybe you do some of that already. I'm a very interdisciplinary, communicating kind of person. And we used to have a seminar at Georgia Tech for our graduate students where they ran the seminar. They had a theme for the semester. Stroke, part of stroke. They would have maybe a particular area of the brain, that like with Parkinson's disease, or stimulation of different areas of the brain. TMS and stuff. So they would have a theme and they would run the session. And they'd be from engineering, they'd be from all over campus. So it was very good. That can be done. That can be done. Just posing it as a thought. Getting oriented is always good. Read the announcement and the instructions carefully, adhere to directions. This is, yeah, I need to do this and I do this, and then you ask yourself when you're done, did I do that? Did I really do that well? Did I have somebody look at this? Because when you write it, it's great. When I write it, it's great. When somebody else sees it, they go, I think it needs some work. That's what I'm getting at here. Get oriented. Consider collaborators, budget. You know what page lengths there are sometimes. You know the recommended number of pages for each section in the grant. You need to have a handle on that. And I think it's just discussed before. There's 2 parts to this. There's the science, and there's putting that story on 12 pages. Not trivial. Not trivial. You have a great story if you got about 4 hours to talk about it. You don't have 4 hours. You have 12 pages to tell somebody who's tired, doesn't want to read anymore. I think you talked about that today. I've been on 45 of these study sections, and I've chaired 9 or 10 of them, I forget. And you have people in there. I've been in rooms with biomedical, with a whole number of people. I was on a study section that had maybe 40 people on. reviews, an unbelievable number of applications. And they're very, very direct. This is it. And you have to be ready for that. So you have to write it with that in mind, and I think that was emphasized in the first talk today. Write it with the reviewers in mind. You better make it easy for them. There was a colleague of mine at UCLA who I learned an awful lot from about writing grants and writing manuscripts, Judy Smith. And she would write a paper or a grant application, and it was unbelievable. The way it was highlighted in some places and bolded in some other places, and the picture was stuck in here, and it told the story visually and very comfortable reading. You know, I don't want to, they have font recommendations and things like that, of course, but you don't want to jam too much in. It has to be readable, presentable, besides being good work. So this is how you get oriented on this. You learn about that as you go through. Another thing I harp on a lot is when I advise junior faculty, mid-career faculty, which I do a lot of these days, young faculty or graduate students, the time required to write a grant. It's not what you think it is, because you don't want to just send something in. That was on the first couple of slides. You're not going to apply to you do not apply if you're just going to send something in. Don't waste time. Don't waste your time and anybody else's time. Estimate the time required, and I put guesstimate the amount of writing time. And I used to have a phrase in there that said double it, and I took it out because it's more than double it sometimes. I can't tell you how many people I've told along the way, this is not ready. In fact, I was chair of a research committee at Research Advisory Committee at USC. So either myself and maybe some other, one or two other faculty I would ask to help out along the way. We also had an external review system where I'd send these grants out for external reviewer. You can do that here. The dean has agreed to that. But you've got to give yourself time, which means it's difficult because sometimes the deadline comes up like that. What do I do? Well, then think about whether you're going to go for it or not. If you have something ready that you've been in your general theme and you can go ahead and do that, that's fine. Estimated time and double it at least. We can talk more about that. Move deadlines as needed. Accept the fact that it will likely take longer, and consider external pre-reviews that I've suggested. That's a system we could actually put in here. Talk to the program officer, like as soon as you get the idea. The training grant that I had at, I don't know if you know what a institutional training grant is. It's a T series. It was a T32. And I mentioned it when I was at the Tiger Workshop to Ralph Nitkin, who at the time was in NCMRR. He still is. He was away and now he's back. But he was one of the main people, good friend of mine and a lot of other people there. I mentioned it to Ralph. I said, this is what I want to do. I want to have an orthotics and prosthetics master's, no, we already had the master's degree program. We started that 2002. I want to have a training grant in that. And he said to me, because I was at Georgia Tech, he said, you're going to build a bunch of widgets? You're going to do a lot of composites? I said, no. I'm interested in how, Ping's not here either. I'm interested in how they learn how to use these things. I'm interested in compliance. I was in USOC Olympic Training Center stuff, grants and stuff for a long time. And I was on a project where these guys designed bicycles that were the most aerodynamic bicycle you'd ever want. And they were never used. You know why? People didn't like them. They didn't like them. All of that money. So it's a human-machine interface kind of question, but it's a bigger question. How do they feel about using it? It's a whole deal in prosthetics and orthotics. A whole deal is the psychology of it. Phantom pain is one. There's a lot of other things, but you have to have that. So contact your program officer as early as you can. I talked to Ralph, and 2 years later, we had the grant. 2 years later. Because he realized what we were doing. You educate them as to what you're doing. and then they see you again with an application, boy, go to them first. At that Tiger workshop, which I also have noted on here, they want you to talk to them. Statisticians want you to talk to them. Why? It makes it easier for them to know what you're doing out of the gate. If you come to them and there's like 2 weeks to go, forget it, right? Forget it. They cannot help you. They cannot help you. Early, 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 early. Emphasize. So we have 5 areas. They've been talked about: significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. The reason I have approach is because that's usually hit the hardest. That is hit the hardest, percentage-wise. Every time I get a review, I've helped somebody write a grant and I get a review or my own reviews, I just make a note of the scores. And every single time, the approach, what are you doing? And I think a point that was made in the first talk also is clarity. You have to be clear. You have to be clear about what you're doing. If you're not clear, you can have the best approach since sliced bread, and you will not get it. They will not understand what you're doing. So be clear with the approach. That was discussed earlier, so I won't go into more. These are the overall impact scores. You get a score on each one of these sections, and then you get an overall impact score. That is the score. That is the score. That drives to a percentile, as Brock knows, and the waters change, and the environment changes, and the funding levels change. But you need to think your best product, which I mentioned earlier, in these 1 or 2 category here. This is the thing you can see with what the NIH puts out. Okay, a 1, all strengths. 9, all weaknesses. I've seen 9s, 8s. What you see, though, is a lot in here, right? That's where you see everybody lives in 2.5 to 4.5, because the reviewers jam those numbers in there. They can't decide how good it is yet. So they go over it. That's why you talk about it. But this is the scoring that they use on each one of these categories. And then they have an impact score. And as was mentioned earlier, this is an assessment of the likelihood for the project to exert a sustained and powerful influence on the field. You can have a significant problem that you're dealing with, and it can be significant to your timing in your application for that. But if it's not going to have any impact, they are not going to fund it. If it gets a low impact, that's a difference between significance and impact. You have to make an impact. You have a very significant problem that you're dealing with, but are you going to make an impact on that? And that's the question. And that's why you have to consider that at the very outset in writing impact scores. It's a synthesis of the 5 scored review criteria. It's not an average. It's just they consider all of those scores. And they themselves, each reviewer, you know, you get your scores back, and someone doesn't like your approach, and someone doesn't like you, and someone doesn't like the environment or something. But approach is the thing. Approach is the thing. Explains the question you will address. I'm not going to go into this. It was talked about earlier. Far and above everything you write on that grant, the aims page is the most important page. If you can't get past the aims page and think it's good, and someone else thinks it's good, you have trouble moving on to the other sections. Your aims have to be that. Are exciting discoveries. She's already beginning to tell you what they've done and how exciting that is. Next paragraph, human patients with type 2 diabetes exhibit muscle mitochondrial dysfunction, but contributions of energy metabolism to diabetic bone fragility remain unknown. This is an unknown fact. She's done some work on this. She's worked with a postdoc. She's worked in her PhD work with some very good people at Michigan and other places in bone. And she knows what the gaps are in the literature, and she's telling them what they are. You have to be right up front. What's not known? What does this project address? What question are you answering? Well, she's kind of told us that right up front here. And then she hits them with our long-term goal, our objective for this proposal, these novel assessments, and central hypothesis. You have any comments on this? We all learn from these things. The young lady was a very good writer. But she's hit some of the major things that we talk about in the aims page right here. Now, that's not to say it needs further tuning. It's not to say other people have looked at that since the workshop. I've kind of been in touch with her for a while, but I don't know an updated copy of this. And then she has 3 aims. Determine the impact of obesity-driven diabetes, dietary-induced obesity, on osteovasculature and bone quality. He's comparing 2 diets. Osteovasculature is the vascularization in the medullary canal, so that's how bone is vascularized, which then, of course, has to do with the integrity of the bone and the properties of the bone. And Caillou might be interested in this kind of topic. You are. And right out of the gate, we hypothesized this. Second one, pretty direct. What I liked about the project was the involvement of the myokines, which are produced by muscle that influence bone. So it's an integrated approach to bone muscle integrity. We hypothesize. Determine the effects of this on changes in osteovasculature, bone quality, and bone targeting myokines. So she has the chemistry down. She has the hypotheses in each one of these aims that's being addressed. They, in part, address her central hypothesis, which is noted in the paragraph above. So I use this for a couple of reasons. One is she seems to have hit some of the major things you need to hit when you write an aims page, and you don't have a lot of room to do it. Second, these aims, if you read them, are independent of one another. You could easily do aim 2 before you do aim 1. Should be able to do that. You do them in parallel with one another. And I had another page, but she did have something to expand our understanding of this is a payoff. Metabolic changes that occur, type 2 diabetes mellitus. Diabetes is a huge problem, of course. Obesity is a huge problem in this country. They are certainly not independent of one another. And she's looking at fracture because the bone quality is compromised in these subjects, in these patients, which is an enormous number. So if you think there's a significant problem, there is a significant problem. But if you think further about the impact of this work, which is the critical thing, this type of analysis and the rodent model that they're using is a pretty good corollary to humans. If you think about the impact of that and what she's described here, you can't get it all at once because you need some other things to read, but my point is she did address the impact of this work. And what I also liked is in her Biosketch, she actually described why she was the perfect person to do this. It's in a stage, a point in her career that says, I'm the one that should be doing this, not somebody else. And for these reasons. I've come this way, I know this. This is a problem. It's a significant problem. I can have an impact with these novel assessments that she's identified, and you're done. You're done. So I'm going to end with that. I have a lot to soak in, so to speak. And I think that's why you need these regularly. We could do another session just on significance if you want, really. They don't have to be 3 hours either. They can be an hour and a half. And we can just tackle one thing and then the second thing. We have time to do two things. But the point is, and I think another idea might be to use somebody's work that they're in the middle of, one of you all, and bring it to the workshop and talk about it. Takes a little guts, maybe a lot of guts. Thick skin, I call it. But you got to be able to take criticism. And it's better to get it sooner than later. So thank you for listening.